The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet suburb, casting a golden glow over the sleepy houses and dew-covered lawns. Birds chirped in the distance, and a soft breeze rustled through the leaves of my red maple tree as I sipped my morning coffee on the porch. It was one of those rare, peaceful mornings where nothing seemed wrong with the world. Until I saw her, Karen. There she stood, like a storm cloud in a sundress, arms crossed and eyes squinting at my yard, like it had personally offended her. I knew the look well. She wore it every time someone dared deviate from her mental HOA handbook, even if we didn't technically have an HOA. Somehow Karen still acted like the president of an imaginary one. I barely had time to brace myself when she started walking up the driveway, each step deliberate and filled with judgment. I could already guess what she was going to say. After all, she had complained about my yard before. She didn't like the way I let clover grow between the grass. She didn't like the way I had bird feeders out that attracted squirrels. And she really didn't like the patch of wildflowers I had planted near the mailbox, claiming they looked like weeds and were attracting too many bugs. This time, though, there was a new level of irritation in her eyes. "Good morning, Karen," I said, trying to sound cheery despite the pit forming in my stomach. She didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, her eyes scanned my front yard like a disapproving schoolteacher grading an essay written in crayon. "This yard," she finally said, gesturing vaguely with one manicured hand, "is a complete mess. Honestly, it looks like a jungle." Opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off. Really, do you even own a lawnmower or a weed whacker? Your grass is uneven. There are flowers growing in clumps, and that pile of mulch. She pointed accusingly at a neat stack of bark mulch waiting to be spread. Looks like an anthill. This is a neighborhood, not a forest. I resisted the urge to sigh. Instead, I calmly explained, "Actually, it's a pollinator garden. I've been planting native flowers to help support bees and butterflies. That mulch is for moisture retention and to protect the roots." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Pollinator garden?" she repeated, like I'd just said I was growing cannabis. "Next to the petunias." "Look, I don't know what that means, but it's not appropriate for a front yard. People walk by and think no one lives here. Or worse, they think it's abandoned." She crossed her arms tighter, and I could practically hear her internal monologue about how my messy yard was surely lowering property values, scaring away potential home buyers, or bringing shame upon our cul-de-sac. I tried to stay calm. "It's not unkempt, it's just natural. I chose plants that are native to this region, so they need less water and attract more wildlife. And honestly, I like the way it looks." Karen sniffed. "Well, I don't. And I'm not the only one. Other neighbors have mentioned it. It's an eyesore. We all try to keep our yards tidy. Look at the Thompsons, or the Shaws. Even the Martins keep their grass mowed, and they're never even home." I glanced over at the Shaws' yard. Yes, it was tidy, but also sterile. A flat lawn with perfectly trimmed bushes and 2 plastic flamingos near the porch. Not a single bird, bee, or butterfly in sight. Just mulch, lawn, and pesticide. "I understand your concerns," I said, choosing diplomacy. "But I'm not breaking any codes or laws. My yard just looks a little different. And honestly, I think diversity is good, for people and plants." Karen scoffed. "We'll see what the city has to say. I'm considering filing a complaint." That part stung. She'd threatened it before, but never gone through with it. I wasn't sure if she could actually get the city involved, but knowing her, she'd dig through bylaws just to find something to use against me. Before I could say anything else, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, stopping only once to glance over her shoulder and mutter, "It's embarrassing." "Really?" I watched her retreating figure, a mix of anger and sadness bubbling inside me. I'd put so much love into that yard. It wasn't just a patch of land, it was a little sanctuary. A place where bees buzzed happily, butterflies flitted between purple coneflowers and milkweed, and robins bathed in the bird bath near the porch. I even had a hedgehog that visited now and then. To me, it was beautiful. To her, it was an affront to suburban order. I sat back down on the porch, my coffee now cold. I wanted to forget the whole thing, but I couldn't. I felt humiliated and unfairly judged, and worse, I worried she might turn others against me. Karen had that kind of power in our neighborhood. She had a way of stirring people up and making minor things seem like crises. I glanced out over my yard again. The flowers swayed in the breeze. A hummingbird zipped past the salvia. A monarch butterfly landed on the milkweed, its delicate wings opening and closing like a slow heartbeat. Tea didn't feel like a mess. That's when I had an idea. Not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Maybe people didn't understand what they were looking at. Maybe all they saw were tall flowers and uneven edges, because no one had ever explained why those things mattered. If Karen was going to make noise about my yard, maybe I could make some noise too, just a different kind. I took out my phone, stood at the edge of my flower bed, and hit record. By the time the next morning rolled around, I had almost convinced myself to forget the whole thing. Karen was just being Karen, I told myself. Let her grumble and gossip. She had nothing better to do. I was going to focus on my garden, my peace, my sanity. That plan lasted until I walked out to get the mail. There it was. A folded piece of paper, tucked neatly under the mailbox flag. No envelope, no postage, just slipped in like a calling card. From a passive-aggressive fairy. I opened it, already knowing what I'd find. Typed in Comic Sans, as if that somehow softened the blow, was a short note. Several neighbors have expressed concern over the state of your yard. It is unsightly, disruptive, and not in keeping with the standards of our neighborhood. Please consider taking appropriate action to rectify this issue before more formal steps need to be taken. Concerned neighbors. Concerned neighbors. Right, that was Karen, 100%. She loved hiding behind anonymity, pretending she was the voice of a silent majority. I could practically hear her tone in those words, snide, self-important, and just vague enough to sound official. Before more formal steps need to be taken? Please. I stood there for a moment, gripping the note. My fingers crinkled the edges. My garden stretched out behind me, sun-drenched and alive. Bees floated lazily from blossom to blossom. A goldfinch hopped through the tall grass. The irony was painful. Everything Karen called mess was bursting with life and purpose. Walked back inside, the note still in my hand. I thought about throwing it out, or framing it, or maybe sending it back with a bouquet of dandelions. Instead, I set it on the table and made a decision. I opened my phone and pulled up the video I had taken the day before. Just a simple clip of me talking in front of my yard, explaining what I'd planted and why. Native plants like milkweed and coneflower, selected for pollinators, no pesticides. A bird bath for local wildlife, mulch to keep the soil healthy. I talked about sustainability and creating a space that wasn't just pretty to people, but valuable to the environment. It was casual and honest, nothing dramatic. I had planned to keep it for friends, maybe post it to a neighborhood group with a polite caption like, "Just a peek into what I've been working on." But after that note, after Karen's smug little stunt, I was no longer in the mood to be subtle. I uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "Karen called my yard a mess. Here's what it really is. Pollinator Garden, our Karen Chronicles." I hit post and forgot about it. The rest of the day passed normally. I ran errands, watered my plants, even stopped by the local nursery to pick up a new bag of compost. It wasn't until dinner that I checked my phone again and blinked at the notification screen. Something was off. Dozens of hearts, comments, shares. I opened TikTok. My video had 22,000 views. By bedtime, it was at 60,000. I stared at the screen, slack-jawed as comments poured in. "Your yard is stunning. Tell Karen to kick rocks." This is exactly what we need more of. Bless you for helping the bees. My HOA would faint if I planted one milkweed. You're a hero. Karen sounds like the type of person who vacuums her lawn. Do a part 2. And the messages kept coming. People were tagging their friends, asking questions about native plants, sharing their own experiences with nosy neighbors and misunderstood gardens. Someone even stitched my video with a tutorial on how to turn a front yard into a sustainable ecosystem. I wasn't just being defended, I was being celebrated. By the next morning, the video had over 2 million views. It was surreal. I had gone from local garden pariah to a sort of internet folk hero in less than 24 hours. A few people messaged asking for a full plant list. One woman from Oregon asked if I'd mind if she replicated my layout. A teacher from Minnesota wanted to show the video to her 5th grade class during a lesson on pollinators. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Still, I couldn't help but think about Karen. I hadn't seen her since the mailbox note. I wondered if she'd seen the video, if someone in her circle had shown it to her with a little smirk, if she had scowled at the comments, realizing that instead of shaming me into submission, she had accidentally given me a spotlight. The funniest part? I hadn't even shown her house or named her in the video. She wasn't in it, yet she was everywhere in the comments. Karen had become a stand-in for every nosy neighbor who didn't understand that lawns could be more than just turf and symmetry. I posted a follow-up video that afternoon, responding to some of the top comments and giving a mini tour of the plants in bloom. I talked about the goldenrod, the creeping thyme, the bee balm, and the salvia. I explained how I stopped mowing certain patches so ground-nesting bees could thrive. People loved it. Someone messaged me, "You're going viral, own it." And I realized I could, not just for me, not just out of spite for Karen, but because this whole thing had accidentally uncovered something people were hungry for. Beauty with purpose, nature in our own yards, a way to push back against the sterile, chemically treated definition of normal that people like Karen clung to. I didn't have to defend myself. I just had to keep telling the truth. My truth was growing right outside my front door, and now millions of people could see it. By the time the weekend rolled around, the story had become bigger than I ever anticipated. What started as a simple response to a neighbor's snide comment had snowballed into something that felt almost surreal. The video of my messy yard had blown up far beyond my neighborhood. It was now in the hands and hearts of millions of people who saw something beautiful in the so-called chaos of wildflowers and buzzing bees. But the internet, as I quickly learned, has a way of taking things to a whole new level. It all began on Saturday afternoon when I got a text from my neighbor's son, Tyler. He was about 17, sharp-witted, and more than a little tired of his mom's constant drama. Tyler and I got along well. We'd chatted about gardening once or twice, and he helped me move a rain barrel last summer. But I hadn't expected him to jump into the situation at all, let alone do what he did next. His text read, "Hey you, might want to see this. Karen's grass finally made it online." My heart jumped a little. I wasn't sure what that meant, but he followed it up with a link to a TikTok. When I clicked, the video opened with a slow-motion shot of a rusty, pink flamingo half buried in patchy weeds. The camera panned slowly to a faded lawn gnome missing a nose, then swept across a field of grass so tall it swayed like wheat in the wind. There were cans near the back fence, a toppled plastic chair, and what looked suspiciously like a bird bath, full of green slime. The caption was brutal and to the point. "You think that's a mess? Meet the queen of complaints, Karen Grassgate." The video was clever. Tyler had layered it with dramatic violin music, like it was the trailer for a horror movie. Text bubbles popped up throughout. Unmowed since spring. Lawn gnome crimes. Behold, the sacred flamingo graveyard. I burst out laughing. It was ridiculous, juvenile, and absolutely perfect. And judging by the comments, The internet agreed. Within hours, the post racked up millions of views, more than mine. People were screen capturing it, turning it into memes, and quoting lines from the dramatic music over their own bad neighbor stories. It spread like wildfire. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen, the self-declared defender of aesthetic standards, was now the face of lawn neglect. People compared her yard to abandoned lots, overgrown cemeteries, and scenes from post-apocalyptic films. Some even created side-by-side comparisons of my yard next to hers, highlighting the contrast. Vibrant. Wildflowers versus yellowing tangled weeds. Butterflies versus broken lawn decor. But what made it truly poetic was the timing. Just a few days after she'd tried to shame me into silence, her own yard, her real, unfiltered, truly neglected yard, became a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. It was internet justice at its finest, and people loved the story behind it. They loved the narrative. It wasn't just about grass anymore. It had become a kind of parable, the rigid, controlling neighbor trying to enforce conformity, exposed for the very thing she accused others of. People latched onto the hypocrisy. The comments were endless. Karen really said, "Clean up your yard while living in the Jungle Book." Plot twist, the real wilderness was next door all along. This is why I don't trust people obsessed with HOA rules. Every few minutes I got tagged in another post. People were quoting my original video alongside Tyler's, calling it a satisfying sequel. Someone even made a remix with clips of both yards set to a catchy pop song. It was ridiculous and weird and hilarious, and I was just trying to keep up. I hadn't planned any of this. I didn't ask for it. But now it was happening. My yard was being praised, while Karen's was being roasted by teenagers in Tokyo and grandmas in Texas. By Sunday, local media had caught wind of the story. A reporter from our city's community news outlet messaged me asking if I'd do an interview about the viral neighborhood garden saga. I said sure, why not? The story was out there now. And if I had a chance to talk more about pollinator, gardens, native plants, and lawn alternatives, then even better. We did the interview that afternoon in my front yard. The journalist was polite and professional, and we walked around the flowers while I explained what each plant was and why it was important. I didn't bring up Karen's name. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew. The article went up Monday morning, titled, "Local Residents' Messy Garden Sparks Viral Debate About Nature and Neighborhood Norms." It was surprisingly thoughtful. The journalist talked about the benefits of natural landscaping, included expert quotes about biodiversity, and mentioned how the internet's reaction showed a cultural shift away from the perfect lawn deal. They even quoted a professor who called my garden a small act of ecological rebellion. That made me smile. I got more messages after that, from people in other cities, asking how to start their own wildflower gardens. A mom from Florida sent pictures of her daughter dressed as a bee, pointing at one of my videos. A couple from Maine said they'd already ripped out a chunk of their sod and were planting clover instead. One man told me I'd inspired him to stop using pesticides. It was heartwarming. It was overwhelming, and through it all, Karen was silent. I hadn't seen her since the video dropped. Her porch light stayed off. Her curtains were drawn. No afternoon walks around the block. No glares from the driveway. Just silence. It was strange, almost eerie. Then, late Monday evening, I heard it, the unmistakable roar of a lawnmower. I peeked through my blinds and there she was, Karen, in old gardening gloves and oversized sunglasses, slowly pushing a dusty mower across her wild patch of land. It sputtered and coughed with each step, blades slicing through weeks of overgrowth. I watched in stunned silence. It was like spotting Bigfoot. Part of me felt bad for her. She hadn't asked for her yard to go viral. She probably didn't even know. Tyler was filming until it was already too late. But then again, she had invited scrutiny by being so quick to dish it out. And when you build your whole personality around pointing fingers, It's only a matter of time before someone points one back. The internet had just accelerated that reckoning. As I stood at the window, a monarch butterfly floated by and landed on the milkweed near my porch. I smiled. Karen's yard might have gone viral for the wrong reasons. Mine had, unexpectedly, gone viral for the right ones. And somehow, the line between mess and beauty had never been clearer. The days after Karen's silent surrender were oddly calm. No more mysterious notes. No unsolicited complaints. She had returned to the shadows of her perfectly imperfect porch, and I resumed my quiet mornings among bees and blossoms. But the world outside my little corner had not stopped spinning. My videos continued gaining traction. More people followed me, not for the drama, but for the garden. They wanted to know everything. What plants worked best in shade, what to plant for hummingbirds, whether clover was better than grass. I found myself answering dozens of questions each day, giving little tutorials, offering advice like a casual neighborhood botanist. I hadn't planned for this to be a thing, but now that it was, I leaned in. My phone buzzed constantly, mostly with kind messages, but some were different. People, reaching out from city offices, eco-friendly nonprofits, even a few schools. One elementary teacher from Iowa told me her third graders were starting a pollinator garden on the school grounds. They'd seen my video and decided to give nature a chance. She said I'd sparked something. That hit me harder than anything else. One night, I sat on my porch as the sun set, watching the light dip behind the trees, and I realized how far this all had come. What began as a neighborly nuisance had turned into a movement. Small, maybe, but real. I thought about how often we silence ourselves in the name of peace, especially when someone like Karen shows up, loud and critical and so sure of their correctness. But maybe peace wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about knowing when to stand your ground, or in my case, when to stand in your yard and press record. The garden was thriving. New butterflies had arrived, flitting from blossom to blossom, wings like stained glass windows. The bees were relentless, diligent little workers darting in and out of the lavender and sage. Even a fox had shown up one evening, padding quietly across the mulch path before disappearing into the hedge. It was alive. More alive than it had ever been. The city called me a few days later. Not to cite me, not to warn me, but to invite me. A local urban gardening initiative wanted me to speak on a panel. They were hosting a community event about sustainable landscaping and wanted me to talk about how my little patch of pollinators had sparked such a conversation. I was stunned. Me? A speaker? I almost said no. I didn't like the spotlight. I didn't have credentials. But then I remembered something from the comments under one of my earliest videos. A woman had written, "You made me feel like it was okay to try." That was enough. The panel happened on a Saturday. A small but engaged crowd gathered at the community center. There were other speakers, an urban planner, a professor, a local farmer. I was the last to speak. I stood up, hands a little shaky, and told them what happened. Not just the story of the video, but the story behind it. The quiet pressure to conform, the sideways glances, the whispered judgments. And how, for once, I chose not to shrink under it. I told them how it wasn't about being rebellious. It was about being mindful, about reclaiming space in a way that served more than just curb appeal, about planting something that didn't just look good from a distance but gave back, food for bees, shelter for birds, color that changed with the seasons. The room was still when I finished, and then came applause, not thunderous but warm and steady, enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, something was shifting. After the talk, people came up to chat. A young couple asked where they could buy native seeds. A retiree wanted help convincing her condo board to let her plant wildflowers. A teen asked if I was going to make a YouTube channel. I laughed. Maybe. When I got home that night, The porch light on Karen's house was on again. For the first time in weeks, I saw her outside, watering a potted fern on her front step. She didn't look at me, and I didn't expect her to. But as I passed by to check the mail, I gave her a nod. A small, quiet one. To my surprise, she gave a faint nod back. It wasn't a truce. It wasn't a friendship. But it was something close to acknowledgement, and maybe that was enough. The seasons started to turn. The wildflowers began to seed, their bright petals giving way to browns and golds. The bees grew fewer as the days shortened. But the life in the garden didn't disappear. It just changed form. Birds came more often now, picking at the seed heads, fluffing their feathers in the bird bath. The garden had become a year-round haven, not just a summer show. As I sat on the porch one crisp evening, watching a pair of finches dance between the stems, I thought about what this garden had taught me. About patience, about letting go of control, about resisting the urge to prune and polish every inch of life until it looked like everyone else's. Beauty wasn't in symmetry. It wasn't in compliance. It was in the audacity to grow things that weren't approved, in the courage to let nature do what it knew best, even if your neighbor thought it was messy. I posted one last video that fall. A slow walk through the fading blooms, a soft instrumental, song playing in the background. In the caption, I wrote, "She called it a mess. Turns out, it was a message." Full circle. The video didn't go as viral. It didn't need to. Those who had been there from the beginning understood. The story had finished writing itself. Some people plant grass, others plant stories. Mine just happened to bloom.